Brezza is back with a bang. This is Maruti Suzuki's sub 4 meter compact SUV and the market simply cannot get enough of it. 10, 11, 12,000 units every month, month after month. That is no joke. But Maruti Suzuki is not resting on its laurels. The Brezza has been given a comprehensive update. There's updates to the styling, to the interiors, to the engine. There's a new transmission in there. This is proper stuff. We're going to dive into everything you need to know about this car. But before we do that, make sure you like this video. And since you're already there, subscribe to the Evo India channel so you don't miss another review. And leave a comment down below. What do you think of the new Brezza styling? Now let's start with the styling of the Brezza because this is where the most obvious changes are, right? You've got a very strong looking, very distinct face, and there are a couple of styling elements that make it so. One, you've got this very slim grille, different from the earlier Brezzas. You've got slim headlamps with double barrel LEDs and DRL signatures in there. Again, the DRL signature is very different from the Brezzas of the past, makes this Brezza look very different. You've got a very strong character line running through this part of the bumper. It gives the Brezza a very strong chin. It looks really muscular. Below that, you've got large chunky black cladding and a silver skid plate, and integrated into all of that cladding you've got the fog lamps. Very neatly done, and the Brezza has a very distinct identity now. That face looks very different from before. Come over to the side and things are a little more familiar. The silhouette hasn't changed too much. What you do have is a lot more cladding on the side. You've got different wheels. These are 16s on the top spec variant, and you come over further at the back and you've got different character lines. So this haunch is a lot more pronounced, and that again gives the Brezza a little more definition from the side. An interesting feature from the side is this area. If you notice, there's no pillar over here, but instead Maruti's got a full glass area running to the back of the car and then the rear glass going along the tailgate. So this is a very neatly done section on the Brezza, almost makes it look like you've got a floating roof. That aside, the rear section again completely reworked. You've got these slim tail lamps, the Brezza lettering in the center, chunky bumpers, again a lot of black cladding. This Brezza really is chunky. But that aside, it's a very distinct looking car, and there's so many Brezzas on the road now that if you get one of this, you will certainly stand out from that crowd. And correct me if I'm wrong, this Brezza actually looks a lot like the Toyota Hyryder. Now, either I've caught onto something here or I need to wash my eyes with soap or something, but this car has a lot of elements similar with that. Thin headlamps, a thin grille, thin tail lamps, that really chunky bumper area, right? What I think is going to happen is when Maruti Suzuki launches their version of the Hyryder, you're going to be able to draw a styling parallel between the Brezza and that SUV to make it sort of cohesive within the Maruti Suzuki SUV family. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. We're going to have to wait and watch. And now that we're done with the styling, let's head inside and check out the interiors. Now let's talk about the interiors, because the interior refresh is just as comprehensive as the exterior refresh. In front of me, new steering wheel, very similar to what you get on the Baleno, but this wheel adjustable for rake and reach. A very cool touch, not very common in this segment, and good on Maruti for getting it in here. You've got paddle shifters on the steering wheel. Behind that, you've got an analog instrument cluster with a digital MID in the center. I like how that cluster has been executed. It's a very clean design. The information is very clear. It's very easy to read, and those are important things when you're designing a cluster. Behind that, you've also got an HUD, a head-up display, and you can stow it away or pop it up if you want it. And just like the instrument cluster, it's neatly done. The information is minimal, it's not overwhelming, and it's not distracting in any way, so you can drive around safely with that popped up and it won't bother you in any manner. It also has a fair bit of information in there, so you've got your speed, you can have a tachometer, you can get your fuel economy, a lot of stuff in there, very useful. Next to that, you've got a big infotainment screen. Now this is again the same infotainment screen we've seen on the Baleno, and it gets the usual business: Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, not wireless though, and you've also got a 360 camera integrated in there. So you've got cameras all over the car on the outside. You slot it into reverse, or you press this camera button on here and the camera shows up on the screen. Apart from that, when you go lower down, you've got a new texture on the dashboard. You've got AC controls, automatic climate control over here. Below that, you've got a wireless phone charger. In terms of USB connectivity in the front, you've only got a USB Type A, no Type C in the front seats, and you've got a new automatic transmission over here. Now this is not the same 4-speed transmission that you got on the older Brezza. It's a new 6-speed unit. We'll talk about it when we get to the driving. But I think the big talking point on the Brezza is up here. You've got this sunroof, and well, it's a regular size sunroof. It's not a panoramic sunroof, but that's par for the course in this segment. And I think it's a useful addition to the Brezza's arsenal. Now, when I was at the Hyundai Venue launch, the guys over there were telling me that 40% of Venue buyers, over 40%, buy Venues with sunroofs. That's a large number. 60% of Creta buyers buy Cretas with sunroofs. And the Brezza, it never had a sunroof, and it was still doing really good sales every month. And now with features like the sunroof, with all of the techie features in here, the heads-up display, the 360-degree camera, the wireless phone charger, all of that, paddle shifters, all of that is going to draw in a different set of buyer, a buyer who prioritizes this sort of stuff. And now they can finally get it in the Maruti Fold, which is going to be a big plus for them. Now let's head into the back seat and see what that's like. Now let's talk about the space in the back seat. I'm 5'10", the driver's seat is in my driving position, so this gives you an idea of how much space there is. I've got just a couple of inches of knee room, not too much. I'll call it adequate, nothing more. Headroom is actually generous. The sunroof is, well, till about here, the whole mechanism, so it doesn't spill over here. They've scooped this part out, and you've got enough headroom as a rear passenger. Other stuff that's useful in here, rear AC vents. You can control the flow of the AC over here. You've got 2 USB ports, one is a Type C, one is a Type A. You've got this armrest. You can throw it away if you want to, keep it down if you want to, with cup holders. And you've got door pockets, enough for a 1-liter bottle. You've got seat pockets over here, and you've got this little hook over here. I think this is new. It's not very useful if you're going to be sitting in the back seat, because whatever you hang here is just going to be knocking up against your knees. But if you're alone in the car, if you're in the front seat, you can hang stuff here. Very useful. That aside, it's a reasonably comfortable seat. The seat back is fairly upright, but it's not uncomfortable. You've got adequate thigh support. All of that stuff is good. What I do have to criticize though is there's no headrest for the middle passenger, not even a fixed one, you know, so if they're sitting in the middle, it's a little compromise in terms of safety. But that aside, it's a very comfortable back seat to be in. So what is the new Brezza like to drive behind the wheel? Let's talk about the engine first. This is the new K15C engine. So the older Brezza got the K15B, this is the K15C, and what that essentially means, it's now a dual jet engine. It's also got VVT, and this engine puts out 101 bhp. That output figure is actually slightly, marginally less than what the K15B put out, but torque figures remain the same as before. In terms of characteristics, it's very similar to the older engine. At lower revs like this, I'm at 1500 RPM cruising at 60 kilometers an hour. It's silent. It's absolutely silent. It's a very refined motor, and that's something very typical of Maruti's petrol engines. They're very, very refined and very quiet when unstressed. You pick the speed up a little bit, and it has the performance. It's not got a typical diesel-like torque. The older Brezza, the pre-BS6 Brezza, yeah, that had a lot of torque low down. This doesn't have that. You need to work the engine a little bit to get the power out of it. You know, you need to rev it out to really get the most out of the engine, and the meat of that performance is in the mid-range. So once you're past 2,500-3,000 RPM, yeah, when you're in that meat of the mid-range, it really starts pulling strongly. Peak torque and peak power are still fairly high up in the rev range. You need to remember, this is a naturally aspirated engine. It's not a turbocharged petrol engine, so it has those NatAsp characteristics with the peak power and peak torque higher up, and you need to drive it in that manner to get the most out of it. Something else that this engine gets is the smart hybrid system. Now this is essentially a mild hybrid. It has a slightly larger battery. In fact, it has two batteries. One of them is a lithium ion battery, and that allows it to store energy, and essentially it gives it a start-stop system and a little bit of energy saving. But yes, it's not a proper full-blown hybrid like what Maruti's Creta rival is going to be, but it's a useful fuel saving feature. In fact, the claimed fuel economy of this car is some 20 kmpl, which is ridiculous, but in the real world I've been getting a reasonable 12-13 kmpl, which is not too bad. Yeah? It's the same as what you'd get out of a 1 liter turbo or a 1.5 turbo. And when talking about driving the engine well and driving it properly, you have to mention this automatic transmission. Now this is a completely new transmission. We've seen it in the Ertiga, we've seen it in the XL6. It's a 6-speed automatic transmission that comes mated to the K15C, replaces that archaic 4-speed that used to come with the previous 1.5s from Maruti Suzuki. And let me tell you, it's a much welcome change. That old gearbox, well, I really didn't like it. It was sluggish, it was slow, it only had 4 speeds. It was just a relic from the past that Maruti was seemingly just carrying forward for God knows what reason. But this gearbox is a proper new modern 6-speed automatic, and it feels a lot better. Firstly, there are more ratios. That immediately makes it a nicer transmission, you know, because the ratios are well spaced, they're closer together, and that means when you're revving the engine out, you don't have to rev it to the red line to get back into the power band in the next gear. You can drive it in a little more relaxed manner, and that immediately makes the Brezza a lot more enjoyable to drive. The second thing that it improves is just how it shifts. It feels nice, it feels smooth. Like I said, when you're driving it in a relaxed manner, it feels its best. The shifts, they're seamless. Remember, this is a torque converter, not an AMT, so there's no head toss or any of those things associated with an AMT. It's a seamless shifting, smooth shifting transmission. Nice part about this transmission is you get paddle shifters. So should you want to take manual control, you can just drop 2 gears with the paddles and you've got manual control. It's a really slick unit. The paddles feel nice. They're plastic, they're plasticky, but they feel nice, they feel solid, they have a nice satisfying click to them. In terms of the ride, it doesn't feel as what do we call robust as, say, a Nexon, right? It doesn't feel as SUV like, it doesn't feel as unflustered by bad patches as a Nexon. The Nexon really sets the bar in the segment for that characteristic of its ride. This gets a little bit lumpy over really bad patches, but it's still comfortable. It's not the ultimate in comfort though in this segment in terms of a ride. Yeah, it's nearly there, but it's not the ultimate. Now what happens when you start driving the Brezza fast? Yeah, it gets a little loud. So what happens is when you strain this engine, you can hear a lot more of it in this cabin. If you want to drive this, you know, you want to catch this by the scruff of its neck and really drive it hard, you will be ringing it out a lot, because like I said, the meat of the power is higher up in the rev range, and when you try to reach the higher up regions of the rev range, it tends to get loud. So it doesn't sound like it's enjoying it. There's nothing wrong with the engine. It's working fine. It's delivering its power. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's just a little more audible in the cabin, and therefore it sounds a lot more strained. That's not a particularly enjoyable feeling. It's a lot more enjoyable to, you know, just drive it in a relaxed manner. Short shift. Keep the engine lower in the rev range. Don't make it sound like it's straining too much. And it's a much more enjoyable drive at that point. One criticism I do have of the gearbox is it's tuned very heavily for efficiency. So at the slightest chance it gets, it upshifts. If you're overtaking and you let off for a bit and you try to get back on the throttle, it's already upshifted, then it needs to downshift again and then carry on with your overtake. And when calling for a downshift, you've got to be a little firm with the car, right? If you ease into the accelerator, it won't necessarily downshift. You've got to give it a little bit of punch, right? And then it will downshift and get you moving. The shifts themselves, they're quick. They're not DCT quick, they're not super lightning quick, but they're reasonably quick. And even when you call for shifts from the paddles, there's not too much of a lag between when you call for the shift and it actually shifts. It's more than adequate for something in this segment. You're not going to find hardcore enthusiasts buying these tall compact SUVs. They're more likely to buy, I don't know, smaller hatchbacks or sedans. The other gearbox option that you get is a 5-speed manual, and that's a transmission I'm very familiar with. I've driven it a lot in the Brezza, and that's a beautiful transmission. Maruti, I've always said this, really know how to make their transmissions because they're just so buttery smooth, they're so crisp, they're such a joy to use. The clutch pedal is light, the shift quality, it's light, it feels really slick when you're shifting it into gear. And if you are of the enthusiast bent, I would actually recommend that because that's a really enjoyable, involving driving experience compared to this. Yeah, this is convenient, it's easy to use, it's efficient, and it's, well, simple. And now that there's paddle shifters, it's really fun as well, but doesn't stand up to a manual in terms of the thrill of driving. Other things we need to talk about on the Brezza: steering. The steering has always been nice on the Brezza. It's been well weighted, well judged, and that remains. It's nice, slick, oily. It's never too heavy for the city, but neither is it too light so that you have no control of what's happening on the highway. It's a very well judged steering. That remains so. Suspension, again, nice and comfortable. It really rides well, really solidly. This is the Tect platform. Yeah, it's similar to the S-Cross platform. The S-Cross is based on it. Feels very solid, feels very planted on the highway. This is not the same platform that the Swift, the Baleno, all of those new generation cars get, and those cars are very light and they feel very light when you're driving it. This feels really solid and well built. Even when you're driving it on the road, the way it takes bumps, the way it stays planted on the highway, it's a very composed car, and this definitely is one of the better Marutis out there to drive, particularly in our conditions, because our conditions are so unpredictable, and over those kind of conditions, this solidity that this platform gives the Brezza is very confidence inspiring. I haven't been able to drive the Brezza today up a winding road, where in Chennai we're on the ECR, which is just straight highway to Pondicherry, but from what I remember, the Brezza has always been a good handler. The combination of that well-judged steering wheel and this nice solid platform gives it a good handling characteristics on the highway. One thing worth talking about is the safety. Now, the Brezza has been crashed in the past. It's scored a 4-star rating. It's one of the safest Marutis around, and that's because of that solidity of the Tect platform. And obviously that should continue here, but you now also get the option of 6 airbags in this car, which is great. You've got ESP, you've got a whole suite of safety features that Maruti lists out in their brochures, and which actually work, you know. So you've got a good, reasonable amount of kit in terms of safety in this car. What really stands out to me about this updated Brezza is how it does not feel old. The older Brezza, even the 2021, it felt old, right? The platform was old, the architecture of the dashboard, everything was old. They had updated stuff, so the screen was updated and a little bit stuff here and there was updated, but this is a comprehensive update. Everything feels new, everything feels modern, everything feels up to par with where the competition has taken this extremely competitive segment. You know, the venues come in, the Sonnet has come in, and they've pushed the bar really high in terms of what you can expect from a small car like these compact SUVs. On the other side, you've got the Kiger and the Magnite, who really brought the entry point into this segment down, and without compromising in terms of features and tech and all. In the Brezza, it sort of lagged behind all of that, right? It was still a popular car, but in terms of features, there was a young buyer who wanted cool stuff to show off in his car or her car. They didn't have an option in a Maruti showroom, but now they do, and that's what really stands out about the Brezza. You know, everything else is more or less the same, right? The engine is the same. Okay, the transmission really makes a difference to the driving, but the platform is the same and all of that's the same, but this interior is vastly improved, and that makes a big difference to what the Brezza experience is like. It's always been a young car, it's always been a funky car, it's always been about liveliness, and it's always attracted that sort of buyer, and these changes will attract even more of them. I can't imagine the numbers it'll do. Maybe it'll continue to do 10, 11, that's for sure, but maybe it'll do more, and that's going to be really exciting to watch. Also, one thing that I didn't like about it was that the brakes took a little getting used to. I don't know what I was driving last, but when I got in here, I found that the pedal feel initially wasn't as strong as I would have liked. You know, and it's just the feel. The stopping power is very much there. You stand on the brakes and it stops on dime. Yeah, but the pedal feel, that feedback that I was getting through, especially the initial part of the pedal, when you just breathe onto the pedal, that initial feel from the pedal was a little bit lacking. Other criticisms I would have is just that when you rev it out, it gets too loud. You know, it just sounds uncomfortably loud, and that's not an enjoyable feeling. It doesn't sound like the car's enjoying itself, and then behind the wheel you don't enjoy yourself. Particularly with the automatic, I think that's a little bit better with the manual because you're in control, right? You get those crisp shifts in the way you like to, and you can rev out the engine. But in the automatic, it just sounds a little bit strained. Now let's talk about pricing. In terms of price, the Brezza starts at rupees 8 lakhs ex-showroom. This particular variant, the automatic with the dual tone and the ZXi and all of that, it costs rupees 14 lakhs ex-showroom, and that's a fair bit of money. Puts it on par with a lot of fully loaded diesel compact SUVs. But you need to remember that the Brezza doesn't classify for the sub-4 meter tax brakes because it has a 1.5 litre engine. To classify for those brakes, you need, well, a 1.2 litre petrol engine, which this does not get. So it is a little expensive in that sense. But for your money, you get a lot. Because the Brezza, well, it's always been a sorted car fundamentally. The platform, the ride and handling, the dynamics, all of that is spot on, and that remains with this car. The 1.5 engine is really refined, really quiet, really easy to drive. And apart from that, you now get it packed to the gills with features. Earlier, the biggest chink in the Brezza's armor was that it didn't have the features of something like a Venue or something like a Sonnet, but now it does. It can go toe-to-toe, head-to-head with those compact SUVs on the features front. And I think that makes this Brezza a very strong proposition, especially when you couple it with Maruti Suzuki's network and their after sales and all of that stuff. It's a really strong contender in the compact SUV space.